A refrigerator can look like the best machine in the showroom and still be the one that costs you the most after you bring it home. The problem is not that modern features are automatically bad. The problem is that every extra ice system, display, sensor, valve, board, or moving compartment adds another layer between "it works" and "someone can fix it quickly." That matters because a refrigerator is not something most people replace casually. When a major component fails, the real question is no longer how impressive the door looks. It becomes how difficult the machine is to diagnose, repair, and keep running without turning one problem into a replacement decision. So before I give you the two refrigerators I would actually put on a serious short list, I want to show you the filter I would use to eliminate the expensive mistakes first. If this kind of practical buying analysis helps you avoid one bad purchase, staying with the channel for the final comparison will be worth it. The key is to stop judging refrigerators the way the showroom encourages you to judge them. Stainless finish, screen size, door count, special ice, and app features are easy to compare. Parts access, repairability, service coverage, system complexity, and long-term ownership risk are much harder to see, even though they can matter far more later. That changes the buying question completely. Instead of asking, which refrigerator has the most features for the money? Ask, what am I paying for that could become expensive to diagnose, replace, or even source a few years from now? A premium machine can absolutely be worth the price, and a cheap machine can still be poor value. The point is not to worship simplicity. It is to understand where complexity actually creates exposure. A feature that adds convenience but uses common, accessible parts is one thing. A feature tied into proprietary electronics, specialized assemblies, or limited service options is a different ownership decision, even if both refrigerators look equally impressive on the sales floor. The first thing I would evaluate is how many expensive systems are interacting with one another. A refrigerator is already doing several jobs at once: moving heat, controlling temperature, circulating air, managing defrost, sensing conditions, and regulating different compartments. Add water delivery, ice production, electronic controls, flexible zones, and connected features, and you create more paths a technician may have to trace when something stops working correctly. More components do not guarantee more failures, and that distinction matters. What they do create is more diagnostic complexity and more possible points of interruption. The real buying risk appears when those additional systems are costly, difficult to access, or poorly supported in your area. The second filter is parts and service, because reliability statistics can only tell you part of the story. A refrigerator that rarely fails on paper can still be frustrating to own if the nearest qualified service option is far away or a critical component is difficult to obtain. That is why I would never choose a refrigerator by brand reputation alone. Model design, regional service coverage, and parts support can change the ownership experience dramatically. Before buying, I would want to know who services that exact model locally, whether major components are reasonably supported, and how the warranty actually applies. Those questions are boring compared with a new touchscreen, but they become very interesting the day the refrigerator stops cooling. The third filter is repair economics. People often focus on the price of a failed part, but that is only one piece of the bill. A relatively inexpensive component can still become an expensive repair. If diagnosis is difficult, access requires major disassembly, or the failed item is sold only as part of a larger assembly. On the other hand, a more expensive component may be less painful if it is easy to identify, easy to reach, and widely available. That is why I care less about whether a refrigerator has electronics and more about how those electronics are integrated. Complexity is not automatically bad. Complexity that is expensive to service is what deserves scrutiny. This is also where some of the most attractive refrigerator features deserve a closer look. Through-the-door water, elaborate ice systems, multiple temperature zones, and smart controls can all provide real convenience. The mistake is assuming that convenience comes without an ownership trade-off. Each added function may require additional valves, sensors, wiring, motors, controls, plumbing, or software. None of that proves the refrigerator is unreliable, but it does mean the machine should earn its complexity by delivering something you actually value. If you rarely use specialty ice or app controls, taking on extra hardware for features you barely touch makes less sense. The question is not, is this feature cool? It is this feature worth owning after the warranty period? And that leads to the first major shift in how I would shop. The riskiest feature may not be the feature itself. It may be the extra hardware required to make that feature work, and how deeply that hardware is tied into the rest of the refrigerator. Ice, water, airflow, sensors, electronic controls, and the sealed refrigeration system do not exist in isolation. Their relationships affect how straightforward or complicated a future problem can become. So the two refrigerators that eventually make the shortlist should not simply be the cheapest or most basic. They need to balance useful capacity and everyday convenience with serviceability, sensible complexity, part support, and a design that does not make future repairs harder than necessary. Once you start looking at refrigerators as connected systems, the design differences become easier to understand. Cooling is only the base layer. On top of that, you may have separate airflow paths, defrost controls, water valves, ice production, temperature sensors, door switches, fans, dampers, and control boards all coordinating with one another. Any one of those can work perfectly for years, but every additional subsystem gives a technician more possibilities to rule out when performance changes. That is why a simple symptom, like weak cooling in one section, does not always point to one obvious part. The more integrated the machine becomes, the more important good diagnosis and accessible service become. Through-the-door ice and water systems are a good example of that trade-off. They are convenient and many owners use them every day, but the convenience requires extra plumbing, switches, dispenser hardware, sensors, wiring, and ice routing components. That does not mean the design is automatically unreliable. It means there are more parts involved in delivering a glass of water or a tray of ice than most buyers realize. If one small component fails, the repair may be straightforward. If the problem sits deeper inside the door or depends on several systems working together, diagnosis can take longer. The important question is whether the convenience you gain is worth that additional service complexity. Ice maker location matters for the same reason. An ice system operating in a true freezer environment has a different job from one trying to make or store ice inside a warmer, fresh food section. Manufacturers use insulation, airflow, sensors, heaters, and control logic to make these systems work. But the engineering challenge is more complicated. That does not make every refrigerator with fresh food ice a bad buy, and model design matters a great deal. Still, it is a good example of why two refrigerators with similar feature lists can have very different internal architecture. The feature looks simple from the outside. The system required to support it may not be simple at all. Multi-zone and multi-evaporator designs create another useful contrast. Their advantage is real. They can separate temperatures more precisely, manage humidity better, and reduce the way air moves between compartments. For some households, that can improve food storage and everyday usability. The trade-off is that better control usually means more components, more sensors, more fans, or more refrigeration hardware. Again, complexity is not the same thing as poor reliability. The better question is whether the added system produces a benefit you genuinely need, and whether the manufacturer supports that system well over time. A feature becomes questionable when it adds ownership risk without adding enough practical value to justify it. Electronics deserve the same balanced treatment. Control boards and sensors are not automatically a weakness. Modern refrigerators depend on them for temperature regulation, efficiency, defrost logic, and feature control. The problem begins when a proprietary board is expensive, difficult to source, or tied into several functions at once. Then one electronic failure can affect much more than a display. This is where parts availability becomes as important as failure frequency. A refrigerator with a slightly higher chance of needing service may still be easier to own if parts are common and technicians understand the platform. A theoretically dependable machine can become frustrating if one specialized component creates a long delay or an uneconomical repair. The sealed refrigeration system is where repair economics can become much more serious. Compressors, refrigerant circuits, and related components are not in the same category as replacing a shelf switch or a door bin. When a sealed system problem develops, diagnosis and repair can require specialized tools, training, and labor, which is why warranty coverage matters so much here. I would not judge a refrigerator by one online complaint about a compressor, because individual failures do not establish a reliable pattern. What matters is the combination of documented service history, warranty terms, parts support, and local technician access. A major system is only as reassuring as the support available when something actually goes wrong. This is also why the price of a part can be misleading. Imagine a small component that costs very little but sits behind hours of disassembly, or a sensor that can only be purchased as part of a larger assembly. The owner does not pay for the part alone. They pay for diagnosis, labor, access, reassembly, and sometimes multiple visits if the cause is not obvious. Now compare that with a more expensive component that is common, accessible, and easy to identify. The first repair can end up costing more despite the cheaper part. That is the ownership logic most showroom comparisons completely miss because service architecture is invisible until something fails. So when a basic refrigerator seems less impressive next to a feature-heavy model, do not assume the simpler machine is automatically better. Simplicity only helps when it comes with decent construction, good part support, sensible capacity, and service availability. At the same time, do not assume the premium model deserves its price simply because it can do more. The real comparison is how much useful convenience you receive for every extra layer of complexity you accept. That gives us a much better filter for the next step. Not a dramatic blacklist, but a closer look at the refrigerator profiles that deserve extra scrutiny before you spend your money on them. The first refrigerator profile I would question is the one trying to do everything at once. Multiple ice options, flexible temperature drawers, touch displays, internal cameras, app controls, and several powered compartments can be useful, but each feature adds hardware or electronics that may eventually need service. That does not make the refrigerator bad. It simply raises the bar for what the machine needs to prove before I would recommend it. If you genuinely use those features, the trade-off may be reasonable. If you do not, you are accepting extra complexity without receiving much benefit. Premium convenience should solve a real household problem, not just make the specification sheet longer. The second profile is more surprising. A refrigerator from a brand with weak service coverage where you live. This is easy to overlook because national reliability rankings can create a false sense of security. A model may perform well overall and still be a poor choice for you if the nearest qualified technician is difficult to reach, or parts routinely take longer to obtain in your region. That is why local support can matter as much as brand reputation. Before buying, check who actually services the exact model in your area. A dependable refrigerator is valuable, but a repairable refrigerator with accessible support can be much easier to own when something eventually goes wrong. The third profile is any model that depends heavily on proprietary assemblies that cannot be serviced in smaller pieces. This is where a modest failure can become a much larger bill. If a sensor, control, dispenser mechanism, or other component is only sold as part of a complete assembly, you may end up replacing far more than the failed piece itself. The same concern applies when an uncommon control board or specialized module becomes difficult to source later. None of this can be judged from the showroom floor, which is why parts diagrams, service information, and actual availability matter. Repairability is not only about whether a machine can be fixed, it is about how economically it can be fixed. I would also be more cautious with a major new redesign that does not yet have much long-term evidence behind it. New does not mean bad, and older does not automatically mean better. But when a refrigerator platform introduces a different compressor system, door architecture, cooling layout, or control strategy, the uncertainty is higher simply because fewer years of ownership data exist. If you replace appliances frequently, that may not bother you. If you are buying with the intention of keeping the refrigerator for a decade or longer, proven design maturity deserves more weight. The safest conclusion is not to reject new technology, but to recognize when you are paying to become an early long-term owner. There is an important exception to all of this. A feature-rich French door refrigerator can still be the right purchase. If the model has good support, the warranty is meaningful, local technicians can service it, and your household actually benefits from the layout and convenience, the added complexity may be completely justified. This is where simplistic advice like never buy smart refrigerators or always buy the most basic model falls apart. Different households value different things. A large family may benefit from flexible storage that a simpler machine cannot provide. The point is not to eliminate complexity. It is to make sure the convenience you gain is worth the extra systems you agree to own. That gives us a useful recommendation gate. Before any refrigerator becomes one of my final two, it needs to pass several tests at once. I want a defensible reliability record, reasonable parts availability, enough local service support, manageable mechanical complexity, useful capacity, and a warranty that actually matters on the expensive systems. I also want the design to make sense for normal daily use because reliability means little if the layout frustrates you every morning. Most importantly, the machine has to offer value for a specific buyer rather than winning on one isolated statistic. The best choice is not the refrigerator with the fewest features, it is the one with the best balance. The first final candidate should therefore be the simplicity first choice. I would look for a mature, straightforward configuration with fewer unnecessary integrated systems, common service parts, broad technician familiarity, and enough capacity for an average household. This is the refrigerator for someone who would rather give up a little showroom excitement in exchange for more predictable ownership. It still needs good temperature performance, usable storage, and sensible energy use, so basic cannot be the only qualification. The advantage is that fewer elaborate systems can mean fewer expensive surprises to investigate later. This option should win because its entire design supports long-term ownership, not because it is simply the cheapest machine available. The second candidate should solve a different problem. Some buyers want the modern layout, larger capacity, better organization, and daily convenience of a more advanced refrigerator, and telling them to buy the most basic top freezer model is not useful advice. So the second choice should preserve those benefits while avoiding needless complexity where possible and backing them with stronger service and parts support. It will probably carry more repair exposure than the simplicity first option, and that caveat should be clear. But if the added features materially improve how your household uses the refrigerator, the trade-off may make sense. The final decision then is not cheap versus expensive. It is simplicity versus justified complexity. At this point, the decision starts to separate into two very different kinds of refrigerator buyer. The first wants the lowest reasonable ownership complexity and is willing to give up some premium convenience to get it. The second wants a modern French door layout, strong capacity, and useful features, but does not want every possible gadget attached to the machine. Those buyers should not receive the same recommendation. A simple top freezer can make excellent sense for one household and feel completely wrong for another. The goal is not to crown one refrigerator architecture as universally best. It is to match the amount of complexity you accept to the benefits you will actually use every day. For the simplicity first buyer, I would start with a mature top freezer design rather than a refrigerator loaded with dispensers, convertible drawers, and multiple ice systems. Current Whirlpool top freezer models still offer straightforward configurations with electronic temperature controls and optional rather than mandatory ice-making hardware. That matters because you can buy the cooling and storage function without automatically buying every convenience subsystem around it. The compromise is obvious. You give up the wide, fresh food layout and premium organization many French door buyers prefer. But if your priority is predictable ownership, broad familiarity, and fewer integrated features to diagnose later, this kind of refrigerator deserves far more attention than its showroom appearance usually receives. The modern feature buyer needs a different standard. I would not tell that person to abandon French door refrigerators entirely because the layout can be genuinely useful for larger households and frequent fresh food access. Instead, I would remove complexity that adds little value. An internal water dispenser is a good example. You still get filtered water without placing a dispenser, controls, and ice routing through the exterior door. Recent 2026 service data also reinforces the broader point that external ice and water systems are a frequent source of refrigerator service calls. That does not make every external dispenser a mistake, but it is exactly the kind of convenience I would question if reliability and serviceability sit near the top of your list. This is where current reliability data becomes useful, but only if you read it carefully. Yale Appliances 2026 counter-depth refrigerator data puts LG, GE, and Bosch relatively close together on first-year service rates, while also showing that each brand has a different ownership strength. LG leads that data set on early reliability, GE stands out for service access, and Bosch emphasizes temperature control and food preservation. Those numbers cover refrigerators sold and serviced in Yale's own regional market, so they are not universal failure rates for every refrigerator in America. Still, the comparison supports an important buying lesson. The best refrigerator is not determined by one percentage. Service access and design choices can change which option is safer for you. For a household that wants modern capacity without an exterior dispenser, LG's current LRFLC2716S is the kind of design I would investigate closely. It uses a counter-depth French door layout, provides about 27 cubic feet of storage, keeps the water dispenser inside, and uses an automatic ice maker rather than routing ice through the refrigerator door. That does not make it mechanically simple, and I would never present it that way. It still has electronics, an ice system, and a more complicated architecture than a basic top freezer. The reason it becomes interesting is different. It preserves much of the modern refrigerator experience while deliberately avoiding one of the feature areas that can add extra service complexity. The caveat with that LG matters just as much as the recommendation. A French door refrigerator remains a more complicated appliance category, and recent service data should not be interpreted as a promise that one model will last a specific number of years. Local LG service coverage also deserves checking before you buy, because a reliable machine is still inconvenient if qualified service is difficult to reach where you live. The same rule applies to any brand. Before I would spend the money, I would enter the exact model number, confirm who handles warranty and out-of-warranty service locally, and check whether the major parts and sealed system coverage make sense. That 5-minute check can change the recommendation. On the simplicity side, a current Whirlpool model such as the WRT318FZDM illustrates why basic can still be attractive without becoming primitive. It is an 18 cubic foot top freezer with separate refrigerator and freezer temperature controls, glass shelving, and an optional ice maker rather than a built-in door dispenser. The appeal is not that Whirlpool has somehow made a refrigerator that cannot fail. No manufacturer can honestly promise that. The appeal is that the configuration asks less of the machine. You are buying cooling, storage, and basic temperature management without paying for a stack of integrated convenience systems. The trade-off is smaller capacity and a layout that some families will find much less convenient than a French door design. So the decision is becoming much cleaner. If you want the least complicated path, the Whirlpool-style top freezer approach makes sense because you are intentionally choosing fewer systems and accepting a simpler layout. If you need substantially more usable space and prefer French doors, The LG-style internal dispenser approach makes more sense because it gives you modern convenience without forcing every feature through the door. Those are not identical products competing for the same buyer, and that is exactly why they make a useful final pair. One minimizes complexity as the priority. The other accepts more complexity where it buys meaningful capacity and convenience. The final step is deciding which trade-off deserves your money and where each choice can still disappoint you. The Whirlpool-style top freezer choice can disappoint you if your household needs wide shelves, flexible drawers, or easy access to fresh food at eye level. 18 cubic feet can also feel tight for a large family, and a top freezer is not the most convenient layout for everyone, so I would not recommend it simply because it is simpler. I would recommend it to the buyer whose first priority is reducing unnecessary systems and keeping the machine straightforward. If you routinely store large platters, bulk groceries, or multiple produce bins, the inconvenience may outweigh the reliability advantage. Simplicity only wins when the layout still works for your actual life. The LG-style French door option has the opposite compromise. You gain much more usable space, a wider fresh food section, and modern organization, but you are accepting more moving parts, more electronics, and a more complicated cooling platform. An internal water dispenser removes some door complexity, but it does not turn the refrigerator into a basic machine. If you want the absolute lowest service exposure, this would not be my first choice. If your household genuinely benefits from the capacity and layout, however, the extra complexity can be justified. That distinction matters because buying the wrong type of refrigerator for your lifestyle can be just as frustrating as buying one with too many features. There is also one mistake I would avoid with either refrigerator: treating the brand name as the recommendation. Model families change, components change, service coverage varies by region. A company can make one refrigerator that fits your priorities very well and another that does not. That is why I would shop by exact model number, not by logo. Before paying, confirm the current warranty, local service options, major parts availability, and whether the configuration in the store matches the one you researched. If a salesperson substitutes a similar-looking model, do not assume the ownership picture is identical. Small design differences can change the very things we have been evaluating throughout this entire comparison. The same caution applies to reliability numbers. A first-year service rate can tell you something useful, but it cannot tell you exactly what will happen in year 7, and it cannot guarantee that your individual refrigerator will behave like the average. Owner reviews have the opposite problem. They can reveal recurring complaints, but they are heavily influenced by who chooses to post. The strongest buying decision comes from combining several types of evidence instead of worshiping one ranking. Look at service data, design complexity, parts support, warranty coverage, and local technician access together. If several of those point in the same direction, you have a much stronger reason to trust the recommendations. So if I were buying for long-term simplicity, I would lean toward the straightforward Whirlpool top freezer approach we just discussed. I would accept the smaller capacity and less fashionable layout because those compromises directly support my priority: fewer convenient systems to own and service. If I needed significantly more space and wanted a modern French door refrigerator, I would lean toward the LG internal dispenser configuration instead. I would accept the extra complexity because the larger layout solves a real daily problem while still avoiding some of the most elaborate exterior dispenser hardware. Neither choice is perfect. Each makes sense because its disadvantages are visible, understandable, and connected to a specific type of buyer. If neither profile sounds like you, do not force yourself into one of these two machines just because they made this short list. A household with limited local LG service might be better served by a different French door model from a brand with stronger support nearby. A household that hates bending down for fresh food may regret a top freezer even if it is mechanically simpler. That is why the final filter is personal. Start with the refrigerator type that fits how you live, then remove unnecessary complexity inside that category. Reliability advice becomes much more useful when it helps you choose among suitable designs rather than convincing you to buy a layout you will dislike every day. The rule I would remember is simple: Do not pay for complexity unless it earns its place in your kitchen. Every added feature should solve a problem you actually have, because every system you buy becomes another system you may eventually need serviced. That does not mean avoiding technology. It means being selective about it. A refrigerator should first cool food well, fit your household, be supported where you live, and remain economically repairable for as long as practical. Everything beyond that is optional. When you shop with that order of priorities, flashy features stop controlling the decision, and the refrigerator that looks less exciting on the sales floor can become the smarter machine to own. Before you order anything, take the model number and check who services it in your area, what the major warranty coverage includes, and whether the features you are paying for are features you will actually use. That final check is more valuable than another hour comparing touchscreen sizes. And if you already own one of these refrigerators or another model that has been reliable or expensive to repair, share the model, its age, and what happened. Real ownership patterns are useful when they are treated as evidence to investigate, not as universal proof. The goal is not to find a refrigerator that can never break. It is to buy one whose trade-offs you understand before the repair bill arrives.